Welcome to the IVF Journey with Dr. Michael Chapman, the podcast for couples who struggle with infertility and want to fulfill their dreams of becoming parents. In this podcast, you'll learn actionable strategies to deal with infertility from Dr. Michael Chapman, or Prof as he's affectionately known. Prof is the co-founder of IVF Australia and is a leading Australian infertility specialist who has helped over 3,000 couples realise their dreams of becoming parents. To access previous episodes packed with ideas, solutions and tips that actually work, head over to Dr. Chapman's IVF podcast on iTunes. You can also ask questions by contacting Dr. Chapman's rooms on 1800 111 483 or by emailing him michael.chapman@ivf.com.au.
That first cry of a baby born after the long journey of IVF remains one of the most beautiful experiences in the world. As an obstetrician and an IVF specialist, I've had the privilege of experiencing this over many thousands of times in my long career, but I still remain moved by each baby's first cry. It signifies the end of a long journey and the beginning of a new life. This is Professor Michael Chapman, co-founder of IVF Australia and host of the IVF Journey podcast. Thanks for tuning in. To access all the previous episodes, head over to my website, www.theivfjourney.com, and select IVF Journey Podcast from the navigation menu. You'll also be able to find the various services that we provide at IVF Australia. One particular aspect of the IVF journey and the treatment that's involved is the supplementation of natural progesterone after you've had your egg collection. In a natural cycle, the course of events is that the egg develops, it then ovulates, and in the process of ovulation, the place where the egg came from, the follicle in the ovary, changes its biochemical pathway to start producing progesterone. Now, progesterone is a hormone that has a couple of functions. The first, and probably its most important, is to cause changes in the lining of the womb to make it receptive to an embryo. When we look under the microscope at the lining of the womb, with samples taken at various points along the way, we find huge changes in its structure, huge changes in the molecules that it produces. And these changes are what is that which causes the changes in the molecules and the substances that are produced are what makes the lining of the womb receptive to an embryo. So when it turns up in the uterus 5 or 6 days after ovulation, the bed is ready-made for it to lie in, be nurtured, and start forming its communications with the mother. It's progesterone that drives these vital processes. And it's not surprising that the peak levels of progesterone occur around the time of implantation. If pregnancy does not occur, that progesterone level begins to fall. And falling progesterone produces a breakdown of the lining of the womb and ultimately a period. Indeed, it's that fall in progesterone on a cyclical basis that induces the regular menstruation that women experience. So that's nature. Progesterone is produced after ovulation. If pregnancy occurs, progesterone levels continue. If it doesn't, they fall and menstruation occurs. It seems that the falling levels are the vital piece of this. Let's turn to an IVF cycle. What we've done in an IVF cycle is produce not one egg, but multiple eggs. Multiple eggs and multiple follicles that produce levels of estrogen way above what we normally would produce in a natural cycle. And those follicles, when they release the eggs, or the eggs are collected, those follicles produce huge levels of progesterone. But those levels drop very quickly after the egg collection. And that fall off in progesterone can induce early breakdown of the lining of the womb. And so to prevent that happening and to ensure that the receptivity of the endometrium is maintained, it is now standard practice to provide luteal phase support. This comes in a variety of products. The first group are progesterone itself. This is made into capsules which dissolve in the vagina, suppositories, tablets. All of these are inserted into the vagina, and progesterone is released and taken through the lining of the vagina and absorbed into the uterus. And they certainly are effective. In the early days of IVF, when we didn't use luteal phase support, randomized studies were conducted and clearly showed that it is important to use luteal phase support. The other way of giving luteal phase support is to stimulate the natural production of progesterone from the corpus luteum, the follicles from which the eggs were derived. And the stimulation of that progesterone is undertaken by using pregnancy hormone. It's the pregnancy hormone in a natural cycle derived from the implanting embryo which drives and keeps up progesterone levels to keep the pregnancy functional. So artificially we can give pregnancy hormone by injection, usually 3 small injections of Pregnal HCG, 3 days apart after the egg collection, which drives the corpus luteum, who thinks the woman is pregnant. And if the body thinks the woman's pregnant, it will keep producing progesterone. So that's a simple way of doing it. It means you don't have to put pessaries in the vagina twice a day, which many women feel quite uncomfortable with. So why isn't Pregnal injection the standard treatment? Well, there is a problem. And the problem is that women who produce more than 10 or 12 eggs, if they use Pregnal as luteal phase support, they have a much higher chance of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. Now, I know there are doctors that still routinely use Pregnal, but unfortunately their rates of hyperstimulation are higher than probably they should be. So luteal phase support is important in terms of maintaining a pregnancy in a stimulated IVF cycle. Once there's a positive pregnancy test, however, there is great debate as to whether there is a need to continue supplementation. In some countries, United States in particular, carrying through luteal phase support right through to 10 or 12 weeks is pretty routine. In other countries, and in Australia in particular, it is the minority of specialists who believe that that's necessary. Basically, once the pregnancy has established itself and it's producing good levels of HCG, it will naturally stimulate the corpus luteum that are left there, and that physiological levels of progesterone are all that is required, not high levels that you get when you use pessaries or continuing pregnal injections. The use of support after the positive pregnancy test is declining around the world. It seems in a recent survey that less than a third of cycles now are being supported after a positive pregnancy test. Either way, it does no harm. I doubt that it does any good if it's continued beyond the positive pregnancy test. I certainly don't prescribe it. And don't forget that you can access all the previous episodes by going to our website www.theivfjourney.com and select IVF Journey Podcast from the navigation menu.
Thank you for listening to the IVF Journey with Dr. Michael Chapman, the podcast which helps couples negotiate their way through the IVF journey, all the way to parenthood. You can also ask questions by contacting Dr. Chapman's rooms on 1800 111 483 or by emailing him michael.chapman@ivf.com.au.